pleasure to welcome everyone. My name is Liz Held, and I'm a Program Director here at Primary Source. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Primary Source, I'd just like to tell you a thing or two about us. I can get us started here. Oops, there we go. Primary Source is a nonprofit organization that educates K through 12 teachers about world histories, cultures, and global issues. We provide graduate courses, workshops, and study tours that bring global perspectives to K-12 classrooms across New England and the United States. Our programs give teachers background knowledge and teaching ideas on Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and the United States. We also offer numerous courses and workshops that support globally minded classrooms and encompass multiple world regions. Additionally, our 7,000-piece library and growing online curriculum collection provide a wealth of international education resources for schools, teachers, and students. Approximately 2,500 educators participate in our online and face-to-face programs each year, and this means that over 200,000 students benefit from our work annually. To learn more about Primary Source, I'd invite you all to visit our website, which is http://www.primarysource.org. Now, today's webinar on the role of religion and ethnicity in modern Afghanistan is the second in a three-part series of webinars co-sponsored by the Asia Society. Each webinar topic has been drawn from a theme featured in one of Asia Society's Homeland Afghanistan videos, which I'll talk a little bit more later on today. We are very lucky to have with us today Michael Semple from Harvard University. He is a leading expert on the Taliban, the Pashtun tribes, and Afghan politics. He has worked in Afghanistan since 1989, most recently as deputy to the EU Special Representative for Afghanistan. He has interacted with leading figures in the secession of Afghan regimes, as well as its different armed movements. He is recognized internationally as a key proponent of political approaches to dealing with the conflict in Afghanistan, including talking to the Taliban. His experience as a development worker, political officer, and conflict negotiator give him an unparalleled network into most elements of Afghan and Pakistani society. And his understanding of Afghan politics and current history, combined with an international community insider's perspective and access to politicians on all sides of the debate, give him a unique ability to advise on the development of a realistic political strategy for a more stable and prosperous Afghan future. I'm sure that his talk today will raise many questions for you, and we will have time for Q&A after his presentation. In the meantime, please feel free to send in any questions throughout the webinar by typing them into the same question box you used to let us know where you were viewing from. I will also explain later how you can use your phone to call in and ask a question. And now, without further delay and less me talking and more our scholar talking, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Semple. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now, Michael. So could you let me know if you can hear me here?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm delighted to be unmuted.
Perfect. And I'm going to give you control right now so that you are able to show the PowerPoint from your computer. We'll give that just a second. And it looks like I can see your screen.
Okay, sounds good. Let me see if I can bring up some software on it. Make it sort of a bit bigger. That's good. Good. And I guess that we want to have something like a slideshow. Good. Okay, is that working for you?
Let's see. I'm waiting for it to pop up on my screen.
Okay. Let's see.
You might need to click
okay,
Show
so
My
Show My
Screen.
Screen. Yep.
There you go.
Okay. Good. Okay, well, I'll get going.
There we are. Now I can see you.
If you can see and hear, I'll get going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, first I want to say I'm really delighted to be here with you all today, and I mean, thanks for the sort of somewhat lengthy, almost embarrassing introduction. But I mean, the introduction is relevant just to explaining where I'm coming from. I've been engaged in the affairs of Afghanistan over the past more than 2 decades. But in that period, I've been an aid worker. I've been an official of international organizations and a political officer, and I bring my perspectives from that experience to my work as a scholar. So I really style myself as the thinking, the reflective practitioner, rather than a great social scientist. So I'll try and be a little bit grounded in some of my personal experience when I explain these issues of religion and ethnicity, but I think these the personal experiences, or in a sense, are driven by an attempt to understand what's going on, and I'm delighted to have the chance to share that with all the people who are joining in today. I wanted to start with exactly that, a personal experience. In fact, one of the most moving experiences that I had in Afghanistan in all my time there over the years. I'll take you back to the first few days of September in 2001. At that period, I was working with the UN, coordinating relief efforts for people who've been affected by drought and conflict in the country. I was trekking at about 8,000 feet through the mountains in the center of the country, visiting small groups of families who'd been driven from their villages by the fighting. They, of course, were used to spending summers up in the high pastures, but by this time of year, they should have been down back in their villages, but the Taliban had blocked their return. It was wild mountain scenery, vast vistas, but of course no place to keep your children in the autumn and certainly not in the winter. The people I saw had few belongings. Most of them were sheltering in these improvised stone shelters that they'd thrown together. There was no timber, no roofing. I listened to them tell me tales of family members who were missing or being killed, of how houses had been burnt or even bulldozed. And then, not long after I walked into this mountain settlement, everyone started to squeeze into or close to one of the few large tents that they'd managed to bring along. They were holding some sort of a community prayer gathering, and I was delighted to be invited to go and sit right in the tent in a sort of place of honor. There was a bearded young man. He was a mullah who sat there telling stories from the Quran and from Islamic history. The people listened reverently. Then, in the midst of his recitations, a woman asked him a question. She asked, "What does God say about refugees?" The young mullah paused, and then he gave his answer. You could summarize his answer was, "Blessed are those who, in pursuit of justice, are obliged to leave their homes and to suffer in the wilderness." He went on, drawing parallels with the flight of the Prophet Muhammad from his home in Mecca to the oasis of Medina. The young mullah captivated and comforted his audience. As an aid worker there, I was thinking about the challenge it would be for the people to survive the coming winter. But of course, watching the effect of this man captivating his audience, I also knew that this priest's tales of the past just struggles made these people's burden a little bit lighter. On that day, of course, none of us knew how history would unfold just a few days later. The reason that I draw on this example is because, of course, it was no random act of violence that had driven these people up onto the mountainside. It was 2001. This was well over 2 decades into the war in Afghanistan. The people that I'm describing to you were Hazaras, which means that they're from one of Afghanistan's ethnic minorities. In terms of religion or sect, they belonged to the Shia sect of Islam. The mullah himself, whose words clearly had such an effect on them, he was trained in the schools of Shia Islam. Probably he'd come back from training in Iran. And they had been driven from their homes by Taliban. Most of the Taliban who had driven them out were, of course, from Afghanistan's largest ethnic group, the Pashtuns. Although, of course, when you go into detail, the devil is in the detail. Some of them weren't Pashtuns. There were many explanations for the fighting that was going on at that time, just as there are many different explanations for the conflict which continues in Afghanistan. However, underlying it was, of course, much to do with ethnicity and religion. In the going on over the next 25 minutes or so, if I want to get something across, it's just this idea that Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic society, and try and explain what that means, and of course that it's a religious society, and explain what that means. But I should also throw in a caveat. Although here I'm talking about how ethnicity and religion play a fundamental role in the identity that people have in Afghanistan, quite often when you meet Afghans, they will argue exactly the opposite. They will tell you that there are no ethnic issues in Afghanistan, and that only foreigners and troublemakers encourage people to think about ethnicity and about tribe. There are reasons for this persistent ethnic denial. It's about the ideology of nation building. In the sense that the way to be part of polite society is to engage in this kind of denial. But I think very politely and respectfully, I think we can look at the empirics and find that actually identity is indeed built upon foundations of religion and ethnicity. So, just to start, I mean, I guess we can only do this if we actually look at the ethnic groups themselves, and at religion. I'm actually going to spend probably more time talking about ethnicity. So let me dispose of religion quite quickly. There are a few basic facts. The first one is that 99% of Afghans are Muslims. Within them, about 18% belong to the same sect of the people that I described to you up in the hills, the Shias. And of course, they have a different sectarian identity in the sense that they have their own clergy. They have ties like the young mullah who I saw, links back to Iran. The Shias have their own traditions and festivals, particularly Ashura. And in terms of what they think of themselves, the Shia tend to think of themselves as being a minority, belonging to a sect which is not fully accepted by the dominant Sunni state. So then, by contrast, about 81% of the Afghans are Sunnis. They have a strong sense of being the majority sect, even if they are poor or from ethnic groups or otherwise rather marginal. People who are Sunnis, they can see themselves as belonging to the sect of the establishment. And of course, in terms of that critical 1%, the minority, I think of it as the exotic minority, the Sikhs and the Hindus. So small as a 1% minority that they're basically irrelevant in politics. But something I've observed over the years is that they are quite a clearly visible part of society in the places where they live. And I think that many Afghans take a certain pride in having this minority and even protecting this minority as a part of their society. Overall, religion counts because it's a believing society, which means that religious norms intrude into all aspects of life. However, whereas in other places where Islam lives alongside other religions, there's no real issue of Islam versus the rest. Issues around identity are about what form of Islamic identity, not Islamic identity versus the rest, or indeed it's godliness versus ungodliness. So just to try and now to jump over to ethnicity, we could spend the whole time talking about the finer details of the identities inside each of the ethnic groups. Of course, we don't have time for that. There are about 14 recognized ethnic groups. I'm just going to give us an introduction to the four main ones. First of all, the one that most people will have heard about when they hear about Afghanistan, the Pashtuns. Of course, there are no really accepted figures for ethnicity in Afghanistan. If you get on the internet, 42% is the one you'll frequently accept. There are very few Pashtuns who would accept that there are so many, that there are so few of them. They always claim to be a majority. However, the key thing is that they are understood to be the dominant group inside Afghanistan. They are the largest in number. They politically have been the most powerful. For all but about 5 of the 264 years since Afghanistan was founded, there has been a Pashtun ruler. Most of them have inhabited this crescent. You can see this purple crescent in the diagram that I've given you along the border with Afghanistan, along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And actually, a majority of Pashtuns actually live in neighboring Pakistan. But within Afghanistan, having started off in this purple crescent that you can see, over the years, Pashtun leaders of the country have supervised a migration towards the north. So they have planted Pashtuns in many parts of the country which a couple of hundred years ago they wouldn't have been found in. The next group is the Tajiks. They speak the Afghan dialect of Farsi known as Dari. They're mainly Sunni by sect, and although there are fewer of them than the Pashtuns, they're the ones who have generally provided the bureaucracy, the educated professionals for the Afghan state. In a sense, even if there has been a Pashtun ruler, the Tajiks have serviced the state. So they have a sense of themselves not as being oppressed, but as actually being rather civilized, more modern. Sometimes they think of themselves as being more organized than the Pashtuns. They haven't been the rulers, but they think of themselves as one of the superior groups inside Afghanistan. And then the people that I was describing to you in the mountain, the Hazaras, because they are the third group. Few Hazaras would accept that they are as little as 9% inside the population, but that's the figure which is generally put around. They primarily inhabit the mountains in the center, where I found them. Also, they have many members of the community have migrated over the years to the big towns like Kabul, the capital, or Mazar in the north. And in terms of the sense that they have of themselves as an ethnic group, the sense of being an oppressed and marginalized group. They think of themselves as basically being the hired labor and the servants of the Pashtuns and the Tajiks. And then the final fourth group, which I'll give you, is the Uzbeks. They generally live in the north of the country, and I think you were treated to a historical tour in the last talk. Before the foundation of the modern Afghan state, they were actually linked through to the Khanates of Central Asia, and particularly in Bukhara. Of course, most of the Uzbeks actually live in Uzbekistan on the other side of the Amur Darya River. And so they are distinguished linguistically from the rest of the Afghans. They speak Uzbek. And so why they fit into the country differently from the Hazaras is, although the Uzbeks have never really had any role in ruling modern Afghanistan, the areas that they inhabit have got much more fertile agriculture and also very good grazing ground. So they've been rather more prosperous than the Hazaras, even if they've played a marginal role inside in running the country. Now, I mean, I'm sort of instinctively rushing to get towards talking about what role ethnic identity and religion play in politics, because of course that's in a sense what drives things in these world events. But to try and understand the way that these things actually affect Afghanistan as a country and Afghans as a people, it's important to think through popular religion, because in a sense, being a religious society determines almost every aspect of daily life. In private life, even before people enter the public domain, people are engaged in acts of private piety. I mean, that they just saying their prayers, maintaining their fasts. In terms of the rhythm of the year, it's primarily it is the Muslim festivals, the two Eids, the month of fasting, which are marked both personally, privately inside families, but also publicly. Festivals on the streets, the communal prayers for the Eids. But in a very real way, religion and observing the rules of piety are the key to respectability. If you want to establish yourself as a respectable person, you will talk in an overtly Islamic or pious way. You will use long Arabic words with religious connotations. That you will do all the things that you're supposed to do in terms of keeping your fast and so on. You'll make everybody know that you've been saying your prayers. And for the ultimate route to respectability, you can undertake the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is going on at the moment, the Hajj, so that when you return, maybe hundreds of your relatives or your neighbors will turn out to receive you and welcome you into this badge of respectability, the Hajj. And also, of course, there's this whole issue of scandal that we know how sort of political scandals are scripted, say, in the U.S. There are certain sensitivities that if you breach them in the U.S., it's guaranteed that as a public figure you will fall. These things are basically defined by religion in somewhere like Afghanistan. I'm thinking of a classic example at the moment that recently a former Attorney General, one of the pillars of the establishment, was kidnapped and brought over to Waziristan, where he's being held now. And when he was being sort of confronted by his captors, the thing that they actually used against him was basically a video shown on YouTube which caught him dancing publicly in a wedding looking rather drunk. he may ultimately even get a death sentence, as in his captors may ultimately kill him for this. But this is a classic example of the way in which a public figure falls because of his inability to act according to the local rules of piety and public morality. Also, if you're going to have a real sense of understanding Islamic identity in Afghanistan, and anybody wants to to do projects to follow this up, you must get into Sufism. It's the Islam in Afghanistan is much richer than just the Sunni Islam versus Shia Islam. This is, of course, Sufism is the esoteric version of Islam, the Islamic spiritualism. Some of it is very simple. It's just in terms of maintaining a shrine culture. As you travel through the countryside, you can see that there are the tombs of revered holy men are a place where people, and particularly women, are safely able to gather and respectably able to gather. And in a sense, it's a way of having a social life which is endowed with a certain amount of moral rectitude. But of course, some of the Sufi networks are much stronger than that. The way I tend to understand is they are fraternal networks. They are fraternities which stretch across the country, which link the people who joined up, the murids, the members, with their spiritual guides or their peers. And sometimes this translates directly into politics. That some of the leaders of the main political parties that have led the resistance and the fighting in Afghanistan over the years have themselves been heads of Sufi orders. Even in terms of the conflict, some of the Sufi masters are actually involved in mobilizing their followers to engage in the conflict. But also, I found the Sufi orders playing a fascinating role in what I'm interested in reconciliation and peacemaking. That some of the people who have a family tradition of running a Sufi order, who trace their family's role in this back many generations, even today are involved in solving local disputes, and they are accepted as peacemakers by the different sides in ongoing conflicts. So anyway, it's an interesting field for further study if somebody wants to get into the details and follow out what's the difference between the Naqshbandi orders, the Qadri orders, and the Chishtiyas. Now, moving from the cultural domain into the political domain, in my observation of Afghan politics over the 2+ decades which I've been involved there, of course, ethnic and religious identity have absolutely been fundamental, and the way in which we've had a microcosm of it, a clear test of it, has been all the politics around the constitution, the constitution building in post-2001 Afghanistan. Essentially, ethnic and religious issues were very much contested in the debate that we had during the adoption of the constitution. And essentially, the constitution in which Afghanistan currently follows, of course, didn't come out of the sky. It's something which was adopted by an assembly convened in late 2003, which actually dragged through into January 2004 because it proved so difficult to get a majority on the draft that was presented there. And it really, for me, it provided this showcase of how people in Afghanistan define themselves and the kind of compromises they're forced to make when they hammer out the issues of power relations and identity. And I've given you the kind of issues that they were debating during this rather acrimonious and tense assembly in December '03 and January '04. There was the issue of how Islamic an Islamic state would it be. So this debate between the people who thought of themselves as Islamists, people who thought of themselves as modernizers. All of them had to consider themselves as Muslims and accept some form of an Islamic state, but how would it be defined? Then there were the questions around this, how Pashtun would Afghanistan be? You heard in your history session the last time round, I'm sure, about the leading role that Pashtuns had in the state historically, but how would this be reflected in the modern Afghanistan? The people who thought of themselves as Pashtun nationalists, others called the chauvinists, they wanted some kind of recognition of the primacy of the role of the Pashtuns in the state. But of course, the other ethnic minorities had been, as far as I can see, have been struggling for more than 2 decades to get due acceptance of their role as equal citizens inside Afghanistan. This all had to be hammered out in a sort of a converted Bavarian beer tent on the outskirts of Kabul during those days. And then the issue, the very practical issues of the structure of government. Given that there are these competing aspirations of Afghanistan's differing ethnic groups, how do you come up and structure a government that they can all agree to work under? Now, again, this is something which, if anybody's interested in doing some project work afterwards, you can very easily follow up, because you can get hold of the text of the Constitution, and actually you can look concretely at those clauses of the Constitution in which these issues of religious and ethnic identity are raised, and you can see the fascinating compromises that they managed to hammer out in those discussions. I've given you here Article 2, so the founding statement. This is how we have now defined the nature of the Islamic State. That Islam, the sacred religion of Islam, is declared the state religion. But combine that with a statement of freedom of religion. In other words, guarantee of freedom to the minorities outside Islam, which is sort of a almost a notional issue, given that the minorities are so small in Afghanistan, but was an important one to lay down. And then to give more meaning to what it means to have Islam as the state religion, try and say that no law can be contrary to the sacred religion of Islam. So it's not that any ready-made Sharia code will be laid down as the laws which will be handed out to the judges, is that such laws as are adopted by the state, all of them must be deemed to be consistent with the principles of Islam. And then coming to the issues of how they managed to handle this, the issue of the Pashtuns' drive to get recognition of their supremacy, it was a clear statement that that all the ethnic groups, of course, are part of the nation of Afghanistan, and this was in a sense controversial, because in the linguistic usage, the term Afghan, that all of us have heard, Afghan for Afghanistan, has previously been used to mean Pashtun. In other words, it refers to just one of the ethnic groups. And sometimes in conversation, you'd hear people like Hazaras and Uzbeks talking about Afghans, and they're not referring to themselves in that. They're referring to the Pashtuns. There's a clear statement here that anybody who is a citizen of Afghanistan is an Afghan, and all the Afghan ethnic minorities are equal members of the society. They went into detail, which were very sort of hard-fought details to try and find expression to identity. The thing that the Pashtun nationalists held out for and almost scotched the agreement on the Constitution was that they should have a Pashto language national anthem, but in return for that, they got a interesting compromise that the other languages of Afghanistan, other than the 2 main languages of Pashto and Dari, were accepted as for official usage in the areas where they're in a minority. So, for example, the Uzbeks, who we saw earlier on, they got the right to use Uzbek as an official language in their area. This is an example of the kind of hard-fought compromise that you got over ethnic identity when they're constitution making. However, you also get this is the enshrining of what I mentioned as the ethnic denial. You actually get a ban on on forming political parties based on ethnicity or even sect or even of the region of the country, which I find somewhat incongruous, but it reflects this idea of building a nation. Because in my experience of politics, almost every move that happens politically is driven by ethnic identity. Everything that a politician does in trying to mobilize support is about mobilizing the members of his ethnic group, negotiating deals with members of other ethnic groups, and all of this is conducted using a sort of a discourse drawing on religion. But when it comes out to the sort of formal guidelines, no one's allowed to have an ethnically based party. The other key issue that they fought over, and was one that was recognized as one of the successful compromises and defenses of rights in the constitution making, was of course a recognition of the Shia law, at least for issues where there was sort of Shias on both sides of a dispute, something which was unprecedented in Afghanistan, and really combated the previous sense that that Shias had of being not fully accepted by a Sunni establishment. So anyway, definitely, if anybody's looking for projects on this, go to the Constitution. The power politics of this was all interesting because also in Constitution building, they had to look at the structure of the state. This was the really hard-fought compromise. You had a traditional political stance where Pashtuns thought that they were safest with a centralized state. So Pashtuns argued for maximum centralization. The other ethnic groups basically argued for pro-decentralization because they felt that they should be in charge in the areas where they were a majority. They came up with a classic compromise where it was essentially they had a centralized power structure, but they granted some power to a national parliament, which of course would have representation from all the ethnic groups to keep some kind of check on the central authority. And this is a debate which still continues today. In fact, there's even, I think, a resolution in Congress these days trying to push for U.S. support for a federal state in Afghanistan. Just in terms of the way that the state then has had to draw upon religion for regulating the affairs of the citizens, you go on to the law. That we saw in the constitution making, they had to recognize the basic principle that no law can be counter to the principles of Islam. But actually, there are three different sources of law operating in the country. They have state law, which is not exactly Islamic, but is consistent with it. Whenever mullahs have an opportunity to adjudicate it directly, they draw directly on Islamic principles to the Sharia, but also perhaps up to 80% of disputes in the country are not even brought to formal government courts, but are actually dealt with through informal justice. And often the jirgas or sort of tribal gatherings which sit to arbitrate disputes outside the formal system draw on something we call the urf, local custom, which differs between different ethnic groups. So you have a very practical way in which ethnic identity expresses itself in the way that people settle their disputes. If we go through to the way in which ethnic identity has expressed itself in politics, I think that if we take just about any experience from history, we try and understand the history which I think you went through in the past seminar, or if we look at the way in which politics have been conducted since 2001, we find that that politicians and leaders have primarily used ethnicity to mobilize. They have instrumentalized it, and we also see that one of the key motivations for people getting involved in politics or actually going out to fight is seeking a better deal, an attempt for a new contract. Although never was the war which started in 1978 truly an ethnic war, as you try and make sense of any period of it, you can come up with an ethnic narrative, an explanation of ethnically what was going on behind the scenes. This has remained the case after 2001. We had starting from the days of the Bonn Conference, when the new order was founded, this was the case. Even the choice of President Karzai, a Pashtun president, to be adopted by a conference which was really dominated by people who were from the Tajiks, the Hazaras, and the Uzbeks. All this was a part of an aspect of ethnic politics. If we go through the two presidential elections which have been held since 2001, any serious analysis of it finds that the voting has primarily been voting done on ethnic lines. Doesn't mean that people of one ethnicity can't vote for another, but it means that sort of the calculations that are done, the alliances which are built, the alliances which are made are based on building blocks drawn from the different ethnic groups. And likewise in the parliamentary elections, particularly the ones which we had last year in 2010, primarily voting has been along ethnic lines, and as people as representatives have gone into the parliament, they have primarily had a sense of representing their ethnic constituencies. And I think just to run through into religious politics, I won't go into too much detail here, so we can leave some time for the questions. my understanding of the religious element in contemporary politics, modern Afghan politics, is of course that there is no non-religious politics. All politics are religious. All politics have got to be conducted using a religious discourse. We had a classic example of the way in which it is impossible to have non-religious politics right again at the foundation of the new Afghan order back in 2002 in the first tribal assembly, which was held to endorse Karzai as leader and in principle to settle the structure of the state. From the floor, there was a proposal that Afghanistan should be declared an Islamic republic, something which had not formally been anticipated in the Bonn Agreement. Suddenly, the whole tribal assembly was full of sloganeering in favor of this. I think one particular leader stood up to try and suggest that perhaps it wasn't a necessary or a good idea, but soon it was passed by popular acclamation, a demonstration of the point that there is no non-religious politics inside Afghanistan. And in a sense, if you end up running somewhere like Afghanistan, like President Karzai, you always have to be ready for what I call religious crisis management. Periodically, things will crop up where the street is told that Islam is in danger, and the job of the ruler is find some way of dampening it to try and get the mobs off the street. Religious crisis management. Just to rush through the past couple of minutes, that just as I've said that religious and ethnic identity have been key in key in politics. Of course, we're very familiar. I think anybody who's been following this debate sitting in America over the past few years, that when it comes to mobilizing people to fight, of course, Islam plays a role. So that's why I've given you jihad in the case for war. Without endorsing the cliches, I think we can accept that in the practice of conflict in a society like Afghanistan, of course, religious sanction is important for mustering support for the war effort. That was the case before the U.S. intervention, and it's been the case after the U.S. intervention. One of the interesting things is to work out when somebody does give a call for jihad, what gives it resonance and what doesn't. In a sense, God has been on both sides of every dispute in over the past 30 years. And finally, of course, we also know that suicide bombers who have emerged over the past few years, the latest stage of the conflict, they also have been driven by divine inspiration. Those who motivate them to go out and blow themselves up are also promising them heaven. The reason I put this in with a set of question marks and saying that we have to be prepared also to combat the cliches is that this remains controversial. Relatively few people in somewhere like Afghanistan buy into it. It also remains clandestine. Those mullahs who are involved in brainwashing young men to go and become suicide bombers do so secretly, hiding even from family members of the young men involved. There's a strong cultish element, which we can see by studying all the videos that they put afterwards, and fundamentally, relatively few people fortunately sign up for this. So just concluding, what I'd like us to get out of this is that in the religious and multi-ethnic society that Afghanistan is, there's a drive to public piety, there's a drive to private piety which people do of their own accord. This fundamentally is about what they are. It also means that they have to observe public piety to be able to fulfill any public role in Afghanistan. It's important to be able to adopt a certain religious identity. It also means that it's possible to mobilize populist indignation. The street gets angry when you get things like the cartoon issue in France today. But actually, there's relatively little to discuss in terms of the religious political agenda, because everybody is Muslim, barring the 1%. There's little to discuss that. Actually, for me, the ethnic identity is far more what drives real politics in Afghanistan, because actually you can form alliances, Pashtuns plus Hazaras, Tajiks versus the Hazaras. There actually is a far more interesting arithmetic of the ethnic identity in Afghan politics than perhaps there is of the religious identity. So I think I should be winding up here so we can take some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. You definitely answered quite a few questions, and I think probably raised some questions for everyone as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take control of the screen back.
Okay.
And I will temporarily, let's see, I will temporarily mute you, and then whenever we come to the question portion, I will go ahead and unmute you so you can answer.
Okay.
So let me take care of that very quickly here.
Okay.
Okay, so as I said, I think that we definitely had a lot of questions raised right there, and hopefully you have formulated some of your own that you're sharing with us now in the question box. And to get us started, as we're waiting for people to call in with questions here, I just want to tell you a little bit more about how you can ask. You can ask a question by typing it into the question box that we used at the very beginning, or you can raise your hand and indicate that you'd like to ask a question over the phone. And if I see your hand up, we'll call on you and unmute you so that you can do that. So either just raise your hand or go ahead and submit questions into this box. And I'm going to go ahead and actually start with a question that came in while we were listening to the presentation. And that is a question that came in from Watertown. And the question is, what do you see as the strongest connecting threads of identity among all, or at least most, Afghans? Are these threads strong enough to hold a state together? So that is the question. And let me go ahead and once again unmute you, Michael, so that you can answer that. All right. So what is that strongest thread, and is it strong enough to hold an Afghan state together?
It's a very good question, and I think that answering the second part of the question, whatever is the thread connecting Afghans, I am sure that it is strong enough to hold the country together, given that in over 3 decades of conflict, we have not seen any serious secessionist movement. No group has ever had a serious agenda of trying to secede. Afghanistan is not the Balkans. So having given you that reassurance, what is the thread? I think it is a sense of being Afghan, being part of Afghanistan, having a relationship to Kabul as the center of power. And in terms of the political identity, every member of the different ethnic groups has a sense of simultaneously being part of their ethnic group, which is the local, and also being related to Kabul. So they may not necessarily know much about what goes on in the other part of the country or what's happening to the other ethnic groups, but they have a strong sense of what's going on in Kabul, the capital. So everybody wants to sort of maintain their identity as their ethnic group and also have a share in the center in Kabul.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question is actually about the role of women and what they're doing in Afghan politics and also in religion. And that question comes from Susanna. So what role women are playing in the Afghan political scene and also their role in the religious life?
Well, in the political scene, one of the concrete things which has changed over the past 10 years is that more women are playing a role in public life, particularly elected in the parliament. So a quarter of members of the parliament are women, and fascinatingly, they adopted a sort of mixed seating arrangements. They're not sort of hidden in some in some sort of gallery or separate enclosure. If you look along the sort of parliamentary benches, they're dotted in amongst the old warlords and old commanders and mullahs. So women are playing a normal role as members of parliament. Now, if you compare this to the way it was before, I believe that in the 1964 Lloyd Jirga Grand National Assembly that they held to adopt the previous constitution, there was one prominent woman, Mahbouba Hukuk Mal, who participated in that assembly, and by the time we come to today, they're now a quarter in the parliament. In terms of their women's roles in religion, they given that much of religion is, of course, it's personal. It starts at the home. That women are, of course, fundamentally involved in their own piety and maintaining the family's piety. There are differences between Shia and Sunni practices in that the Shia women are welcomed in their mosques and participate in many of the public events, such as their Ashura commemorations, whereas generally there's amongst the Sunni Muslims in Afghanistan, the women play no public role actually in the mosques.
Great, thank you. Our next question talks about the links between Afghanistan and Pakistan and if those are based on language or ethnicity, really asking what those ties are, and also what is it that motivates Afghanistan to kind of tolerate Pakistani involvement in their affairs? Is it that they embrace the Pakistani policies? Is it they can't stop the involvement, or is there something else related to ethnicity or language? Do some of the Afghanis really feel an affinity to some Pakistanis?
Okay, this is a very challenging question. Of course, first of all, it's accidental of history and geography. That the largest ethnic group of Afghanistan, who I mentioned, the Pashtuns, actually a majority of that group still live inside Pakistan. The line which divides Afghanistan and Pakistan cuts straight through the territory traditionally inhabited by the Pashtuns. So that gives links of both language and ethnicity. The way that I sometimes describe the way that Afghan Pashtuns operate is that their cultural and economic space stretches way beyond the national territory of the Afghan state. It covers the whole of Pakistan. They're able to operate in Pakistan. In fact, many of them, they've got strong links also to the Gulf and Dubai, and of course, with international migration, some of them are developing the same in places like London as well. But Afghan Pashtuns are quite happy doing business, living, visiting cousins, interacting with Pakistan. So the two countries, in a sense, are wedded together. This has been increased by the experience of the conflict of the past 30 years, because during the first phase of the conflict, over 3 million refugees, many of them Pashtuns, moved from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and some of them haven't gone back, and some of them retained family ties. So it's history plus geography plus ethnicity plus religion bind these two countries together. They are inextricable. In terms of why do Afghans tolerate the policies of Pakistan? Well, I'm not sure that the majority of Afghans do actually like at least the hidden policies, the ones about the support to different insurgent groups, but they're not really in a position to stop it. When it comes to what we read about in the papers these days of involvement of Pakistan in supporting some of the Afghan insurgent groups, my understanding of it is that anybody who's fighting a war in their own country is looking for backers and support, and sometimes they decide that they can't be too choosy about it, so that Afghan insurgents, even people that you hear about, the Haqqani network, if they can get support from Pakistan, they'll take it because they want to achieve things inside Afghanistan.
Wonderful, thank you. We also have a question from Jennifer, who asks, where does the Taliban fit into this religious ethnic classification?
Yes, very, very good and precise question. The simple answer is the one that I was hinting to right at my introductory case study, that the majority of the Afghan Taliban are Pashtun, and in terms of sect, they are Sunni Islam. Now, I think if you follow their politics over the past decade and a half, if you follow the alliances they've made, the kind of stances they've taken over constitutional issues and so on, and they have followed traditional politics of Pashtun Sunnis. However, when you look a little bit closely, there always are some differences. I have met Shias who've worked with the Taliban. I've met non-Pashtuns who have worked with the Taliban. If you do a really detailed study, you'll find that you always need to have a little bit of nuance.
Great. And another question about the government structure. We've got a question from Susanna who asks, are all ethnic groups proportionately represented in Parliament? And do the ethnic identities of the 25% who are women reflect the ethnic breakdown of the rest of the country?
Okay, these are very good, precise questions. And I would say that if anybody was looking for a project to do on this, I think that looking at the two parliamentary elections and the experience of the Parliament since 2005 would be a very good way of, in a sense, testing the empirics of ethnic politics. That the parliamentary elections have been organized with what they call multi-member constituencies. Basically, Afghanistan has got 34 provinces, and each one of those provinces has become an electoral constituency. Now, that they've got a rather strange voting system, which they call SNTV, which is not automatically proportional. You can get strange results in it, but to some extent, that the 2005 election reflected the ethnic balance of the country, because basically the ethnic group in each of those provinces was then reflected in the members of parliament that they elected. We had a crisis last year over the 2010 parliamentary elections, because in many provinces where there was basically mixed provinces between Pashtuns and the other minorities, because of the insurgency that was going on, Pashtuns weren't actually able to vote. So famously, in one province, Ghazni, which is sort of split between Hazaras, Tajiks, and Pashtuns, actually the Hazaras turned out in mass. The Pashtuns didn't vote. The Hazaras got all the seats. So we've seen some notable discrepancies between the ethnic mix of the parliament in 2010 and that in the population. It's become extremely controversial. Now, the way that the electoral law was designed has guaranteed that the ethnic mix of the women is also just about proportional, because basically they allocated 1, 2, or 3 women seats to each of the provinces. So again, that they, barring these minor voting differences, that the women elected from each province reflect the ethnic balance in that province. So you have women of all ethnicities are present in the parliament.
Okay, and turning back to religion, we have a question. You mentioned the role of Hinduism and Hindus in Afghan society briefly, but to what extent, if any extent, do Afghans feel a connection to their historical Buddhist roots?
I have done a fair amount of work in Bamyan, which of course famously was the seat of the Gandhara culture, and I can remember one occasion when we had some UN volunteers who were working, and there was one of them was a Buddhist from Burma, and he requested before going home to be allowed to spend a little bit of time working in Bamyan. He was allowed to go to Bamyan where he could see the Buddhas, this was before they were blown up, on the strict condition that nobody was to know that he was a Buddhist. I was there, and within about 2 or 3 days, everybody in the whole of the Bamyan Valley knew that this young man was a Buddhist. They were all delighted, and they all started calling him Haji Sab, indicating that saying that he had carried out his pilgrimage. I think that they were absolutely delighted and proud that there should be a Buddhist visiting and respecting the relics which they had kept there. Now, of course, that was all challenged with the prospect of the Taliban destroying the Buddhas. I think that the majority of Afghans felt disempowered and appalled by the, sort of the active vandalism in destroying the destroying the Buddhas. My understanding is that whereas the vast majority of Afghans fundamentally see themselves as Muslims, they're happy also to be Afghan, and part of being Afghan is also recognizing that we have a past, and those Buddhas were part of the past.
Wonderful, thank you. And we are running low on time now, so I just wanted to ask you, Michael, if you have any final kind of takeaways or final words that you'd like to share, keeping in mind that many people in our audience do work with students in particular, and if there's anything that either Americans or American students in particular should know about Afghanistan, about religion and ethnicity there.
Well, just, I'd put in another plug for anybody who's going to be following up on this, that there really are there are great things that you can do, even sitting in the classroom, getting online, going through the Constitution, pulling down the results of the elections and some of the reports that have been written about those elections, that you can really investigate these issues for yourself. But then finally, what I would say is that if you had to brief somebody who is going to work in Afghanistan, whether they be an Afghan or an American, two basic facts that you could equip them with, which would really help them have a more fulfilling and effective time, would be: remember that you are operating in a multi-ethnic society. So anything that's happening, try and work out what is the ethnic agenda behind it. Where are the different Afghans you're dealing with? Where are they coming from in terms of their ethnic politics? And remember that it's a religious society, which means that on the one hand, remember that you have to bear in mind religious sensitivities and do nothing which offends them, and also understand that the way that people are talking with you and the way that they are dealing with you may be driven by their own compulsion to conform with religious sensibility. So in a sense, accept a lot of this about protocol and go through the protocol and then get to the substance afterwards. So just remember, it's a multi-ethnic society and it's a religious society, and you have to be effective, you have to remember that every step of the way.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us, and a big thank you to everyone else for joining us as well. We hope that you have enjoyed today's webinar, that it's been informative and interesting and answered some questions, but maybe even prompted you to do a little more digging, as Michael indicated. One place also that I would encourage you to go to learn more about Afghanistan's history, culture, and people would be the Homeland Afghanistan online resource developed by the Asia Society. Homeland Afghanistan offers short, stunning, really beautiful and information-packed documentaries with commentary from leading experts. If you remember the last webinar, Thomas Barfield is one of the contributors to this resource, and they're absolutely perfect for increasing your own knowledge as well as for classroom use. And we have that website up here on the screen, and we will certainly send you a link to that as well. In particular, related to today's topic, I'd like to point out 3 videos that I think would be really great complements to our webinar, the ideas of religion and ethnicity in Afghanistan. And I would have loved to show you these videos, but unfortunately with tech issues and bandwidth issues and restrictions, it's much easier to just tell you about them and then encourage you to check those out. So I would say, if you're interested in this topic, please do visit Homeland Afghanistan and look at these. You can reach each of these videos by typing in the title in the search near the top of the Homeland Afghanistan website, and we'll also send you the link to them in the follow-up email whenever we send you the recording of today's session. The first video, I have the kind of screenshot up on the screen right now, is called Pashtun Unity, and it addresses the powerful influence and adaptability of ethnicity in Afghanistan by looking at the Pashtun ethnic group. It uses amazing images and great commentary by Thomas Barfield to trace the history and the evolution of the Pashtuns from 1747 to today. So I would encourage you to look at that one. I would also say that a video they have called Identity, the Sum of Our Parts, is a fantastic classroom resource. It examines the ways that ideas of Afghan identity, national identity, ethnic, religious identity, the ways that that has changed over time and the ways that people have thought about it over time. It especially kind of starts with the colonial powers' ideas of what a national identity is, this homogeneous national state, and how that idea conflicted with Afghanistan's actual diverse population. And that kind of gets to what Michael was saying about the political and ethnic divides between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I'd strongly suggest that one. And the third video that really ties in today's themes is called Religious Authority. And this looks at the changing role that religion has played in Afghan society and in Afghan politics over time, looking at religious leaders from early days of Afghanistan through the Taliban to today, looking at the power and the powerful influence that Islam has played both socially and politically. So again, I'd really encourage you to check out all three of those videos, plus all of the other great offerings that they have at the Asia Society's Homeland Afghanistan. In addition to that, I would also say that we have another webinar, the final webinar in our series, coming up on November 30th from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. That webinar will focus on a historical look at art and architecture in Afghanistan, so kind of making a transition from politics and ethnicity to looking at art and culture. And we will have Sheila Blair of Boston College speaking for that webinar. So we will send an email about registering and reserving your seat. Keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'd also encourage you to check out our online resource guide for Afghanistan that we have put together at Primary Source. It's resources.primarysource.org/Afghanistan. And there are some great resources there for the classroom, for your own personal use as well. I would highly suggest you take a look at that. And also, as always, be sure to check our website regularly, primarysource.org, for other online and face-to-face offerings that we're having coming up, events that you can participate in no matter where you are joining us from. Before we conclude, I'd just like to offer one last special thanks to the Asia Society for hosting this series of webinars with us and for making it freely available to all of you. Please be sure to check out their website and also join them in social media. They have some great posts that they share with people on a regular basis. And on behalf of everyone here at Primary Source and at the Asia Society, I once again want to thank our scholar, Michael Semple, and each of you for spending a part of your Wednesday afternoon with us. I know it's a busy time of year, so we really appreciate you coming to join us. We will send you an email in the coming week with a link to a recording of this webinar, as well as links to each of those Homeland Afghanistan videos I was just speaking about. If you stay tuned for just a moment after we close out here, there will be a brief 3-question survey that will help us to meet your needs in future webinars. We really look forward to seeing you virtually or in person sometime soon, and thank you so much for joining us today.